A dying wife trusted a war dog with a secret so powerful it exposed a mountain-sized lie after her death. After 45 years of marriage, former Navy SEAL Ethan Cole thought he knew everything about his wife Sarah. Until the day she died and left him homeless, grieving, and alone except for Shadow, the retired military K-9, who never left his side. But when the dog becomes obsessed with a locked box Sarah hid for decades, Ethan uncovers a trail leading deep into the Smoky Mountains, where a secret mission his wife kept for 30 years is still waiting to be finished. Comment 1 if you'd follow the trail no matter where it led, or 0 if you'd leave the past alone. And tell us where you're watching from. The rain started sometime before dawn, not the dramatic kind that rattled rooftops or split the sky with lightning. This rain came softly, drifting down through the dark Tennessee mountains like a curtain being lowered over the world. A faded blue pickup truck sat alone in the far corner of a gravel parking lot beside a rural bus station outside Gatlinburg. Inside the truck, Ethan Cole opened his eyes. For a few seconds, he didn't know where he was. That happens sometimes. The darkness, the silence, the cold. Then reality returned. The cracked windshield, the worn steering wheel, the sleeping bag spread across the bench seat, the ache in his back, the loneliness. Ethan let out a slow breath and rubbed a hand across his gray beard. 68 years old, former Navy SEAL, homeless, widower. The words still felt impossible when he stacked them together. Beside him, a German shepherd lifted his head, Shadow. The dog's amber eyes opened immediately, alert even after sleep. Some habits never left military dogs. Shadow stretched carefully before resting his muzzle on Ethan's arm. The simple gesture carried more comfort than anything Ethan had heard from another human being in months. "Morning, partner," Ethan whispered. Shadow's tail thumped once against the seat. Outside, rain tapped gently against the truck roof. Ethan stared through the windshield at the empty parking lot. 3 months. 3 months since Sarah died. 45 years together. 92 days apart. Not that he counted. At least that was what he told himself. The truth sat folded in his wallet. A small piece of paper. A list of dates. Every day since the funeral. Every single one. He looked away from the windshield. The passenger seat held several cardboard boxes. The last boxes. Everything else was gone. The farmhouse, the furniture, the workshop. The truckload after truckload of possessions, collected over nearly half a century. Medical bills had taken what illness hadn't. By the time Sarah passed away, the debt had swallowed everything. Their savings, their retirement, their land. The house where they raised dreams they never quite managed to finish. The bank took the rest. Ethan hadn't fought it. He hadn't had the energy. Truthfully, a part of him hadn't cared. The farmhouse had stopped feeling like home the moment Sarah's laughter disappeared from it. A flash of movement caught his eye. Shadow was staring toward the boxes again. The dog had been doing that for 2 days. Ethan frowned. "What's got into you?" Shadow remained perfectly still, watching, waiting, focused. Ethan knew that look. He had seen it overseas, seen it on missions, seen it seconds before explosives were discovered, seconds before ambushes, seconds before danger. Shadow wasn't a nervous dog. He never obsessed over nothing. Ethan pushed the thought aside. He reached into a cooler and grabbed a bottle of water. The cold plastic touched his hand. Instantly, another memory surfaced. Afghanistan, a desert morning. The crack of gunfire, the smell of burning metal. Ethan blinked hard. The memory vanished, mostly. PTSD worked like that. It didn't ask permission, it simply arrived. Some days it arrived quietly. Other days it kicked down the door. Today felt like one of the quieter days, at least so far. He opened the water bottle and took a drink. Shadow was still staring. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. One particular box, a cedar box, sat inside it, small, simple, locked, Sarah's keepsake box. He hadn't touched it since the funeral. Truthfully, he couldn't. The box had always been hers. For 45 years. Whenever Ethan asked about it, She smiled and changed the subject. Whenever he joked about opening it, she laughed and told him some mysteries improved with age. He had never pushed. Marriage required trust, especially 45 years of it. The rain grew heavier. Shadow climbed over the seat. The old dog moved slower these days, stiffness creeping into his joints. But his focus remained absolute. He placed both front paws on the cardboard box, then looked directly at Ethan. A low whine escaped his throat. Not fear, not pain, something else. Something urgent. Ethan stared. What? Shadow nudged the box, then nudged it again. Ethan sighed. There's nothing in there but old memories. The dog didn't move. The intensity in those eyes actually made Ethan uncomfortable. Finally, he reached forward and pulled the box closer. Dust coated the lid. The cedar scent lingered beneath it. For a moment, Ethan simply stared. Sarah's hands had touched this. Sarah's voice had filled rooms while this box sat on shelves. Sarah. The name alone still hurt. He remembered the first time he saw her, summer of 1978. County fair, blue dress, brown hair, laughing at something her friend said. Ethan had survived Hell Week, combat training, deployment. None of it prepared him for walking across a fairground just to introduce himself to a girl. The memory almost made him smile. Almost. The smile faded quickly. Shadow nudged the box harder. Ethan shook his head. Persistent, aren't you? The dog whined again. Outside, dawn slowly brightened the sky. Gray clouds covered the mountains. Mist drifted between distant ridges. The Smokies looked like ghosts waking from sleep. Ethan opened the cardboard box. Inside sat the cedar keepsake box, exactly as he remembered. Small brass lock, smooth wood, worn corners. He lifted it carefully. The weight surprised him. Heavier than expected. Shadow immediately sat up straighter. Every muscle tightened. Every ounce of attention focused on the box. Ethan felt something stir deep inside his chest. Not fear, curiosity. The first real curiosity he'd felt since Sarah died. And somehow that realization hurt, because grief had flattened everything else. Days blurred together. Weeks disappeared. Nothing seemed to matter. Until now, until this dog refused to let it go. Ethan turned the box over. No key, no label, nothing. Just cedar and silence. He remembered Sarah holding it once on the farmhouse porch. Years ago, the memory arrived suddenly. Sarah watching a sunset. The box resting in her lap. A strange expression on her face. Not sadness, not happiness. Something thoughtful, almost protective. At the time, he hadn't asked why. Now he wished he had. Shadow stood. His nose touched the box. Then he looked toward Ethan again, waiting, expecting, as though the next move belonged to him. The rain slowed. The parking lot remained empty. The mountains beyond the bus station disappeared beneath drifting fog. Ethan held the box in both hands. Something inside rattled softly, a metallic sound, very faint. His heartbeat quickened. For reasons he couldn't explain, he looked at Shadow. The old shepherd never broke eye contact. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something stronger than grief. A question, a mystery, a reason to move forward one more step. He stared at the locked cedar box, then at the dog who refused to leave it alone. And somewhere deep beneath the weight of loss, another feeling began to rise. Hope, tiny, fragile, dangerous, but there. The last thing Ethan expected was that the answer to Sarah's greatest secret might begin with a dog who simply refused to give up. And Shadow wasn't giving up. Not this time. Not until Ethan opened the box. Not until he saw what Sarah had hidden. Not until the journey Sarah had planned long ago finally began. Ethan tightened his grip on the cedar box. Outside, the rain continued falling across the Tennessee mountains. Inside the truck, Shadow never looked away. Something was waiting inside. Something Sarah had carried through decades of marriage. Something she had never shared. And somehow, Shadow already seemed to know it mattered. The question was why? Why was the dog so determined to uncover a secret buried for nearly half a century? Ethan didn't know, but before the day ended, he intended to find out. The locked cedar box rested silently in his hands. And for the first time since Sarah died, the future felt uncertain in a way that wasn't entirely painful. Rain slid down the windshield in thin silver lines. The mountains beyond the bus station were slowly emerging from the morning fog, their dark outlines layered against the gray sky, like shadows of older mountains standing behind them. Ethan sat motionless. Shadow sat beside him, watching, waiting. The dog had not looked away from the box for nearly 10 minutes. That alone told Ethan something was wrong, or important. Maybe both. Finally, Ethan reached beneath the seat. Among old tools, jumper cables, and a flashlight, he found a flathead screwdriver. The brass lock on the cedar box was small, old-fashioned, delicate. For a moment he hesitated. The feeling surprised him. 45 years. Sarah had never asked him not to open it, but somehow he knew she had never expected anyone to. The box had always existed quietly in the background of their lives, like a piece of furniture, like a family photograph, always there, never discussed. Ethan stared at the lock. "Sorry, sweetheart," he whispered. The words caught in his throat. Then he slid the screwdriver into the latch. The metal resisted. A sharp twist, a crack. The lock snapped. Shadow immediately stood. His ears rose, his body stiffened. Ethan slowly lifted the lid. The scent of cedar drifted into the truck. Old wood, dust, time. For several seconds, neither man nor dog moved. Inside were dozens of items. Not valuables, not jewelry, not money. Something stranger, much stranger. The first thing Ethan picked up was a photograph. The edges had yellowed with age. The image itself was faded. A young woman stood beside a wooden structure, high on a mountain ridge. Wind blew through her hair. The smile was unmistakable. Sarah. Maybe 20 years old, maybe younger. Ethan stared, his chest tightened. He had never seen this photograph. Never. Not once. He turned it over, nothing written on the back, just silence. He picked up another, Sarah again. This time standing beside 3 men and an older woman, all strangers. None of them looked familiar. Not friends, not relatives, not anyone Ethan recognized from 45 years of marriage. A cold sensation crept through him. He kept digging. More photographs, more strangers, more mountain scenery. A lookout tower, a ridge, a lake, a dirt road. The same locations appearing again and again. The same people. The same mystery. Shadow whined softly. Ethan looked up. The dog was staring into the box, not at the photographs. At something deeper, something underneath. Ethan carefully removed the stack. Beneath them lay folded maps. Old topographical maps. The kind military teams once used before GPS became common. His pulse quickened. The maps were marked by hand. Red circles, notes, coordinates, arrows, dates. Some of the markings stretched back nearly 30 years. "What were you doing, Sarah?" The question escaped before he realized he had spoken aloud. No answer came. Only rain. Only silence. Only the dog beside him. Then Ethan found the key. It rested near the bottom of the box. Brass. Heavy. Old. Attached to it by a faded leather cord was a smooth blue stone. The stone looked polished by years of handling, almost like something carried in a pocket for good luck. Ethan picked it up. The moment his fingers touched it, a memory surfaced. Not complete, just a fragment. Sarah standing beside a lake, years ago, holding something blue in her hand. He had never asked about it. Back then it hadn't seemed important. Now it felt very important, very. Shadow suddenly nudged Ethan's arm. Hard. The dog wasn't looking at the key. He was staring at a folded envelope tucked beneath the maps. Ethan pulled it free. His heartbeat accelerated. The envelope was addressed simply. For later, nothing else. No date, no explanation. Just 2 words. Sarah's handwriting. He would have recognized it anywhere. The sight of it hit him harder than expected. His vision blurred briefly. For a moment he couldn't breathe. 3 months. 3 months. Without seeing her handwriting. Without hearing her voice. Without waking beside her. He swallowed hard. Then opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message was short. Very short. That alone made it feel like Sarah. She had never wasted words. Ethan, if you're reading this, then something happened before I could explain. I'm sorry for that. Trust Shadow. Follow the maps. You'll understand when you reach the tower. Everything begins there. Sarah Ethan read the note twice, then a third time, then a fourth. The truck suddenly felt smaller, the world outside quieter. Everything begins there. The tower. What tower? The photographs, the maps, the key, the strangers, the hidden note. Nothing made sense. Shadow barked once. Sharp, sudden. Ethan looked up. The dog had his nose pressed against one of the maps. Not randomly. One specific location. Again and again. The old shepherd kept nudging the same spot. Ethan leaned closer. A red circle. Coordinates. A handwritten label. Fire Tower Ridge. Smoky Mountains. The name meant nothing to him yet. Outside the truck, daylight slowly strengthened. The rain weakened to a drizzle. A bus pulled into the station across the parking lot. Passengers stepped out carrying bags and umbrellas. Life continued. People moved forward. Meanwhile, Ethan felt as though he had stepped backward into a hidden part of his own marriage. 45 years. How could someone stay married for 45 years and still discover entire pieces of another person's life? The question troubled him, more than he wanted to admit. He leaned back against the seat. Sarah, the woman who knew every scar on his body, every nightmare, every memory he wished he could forget. The woman who sat beside him through decades of deployments, who waited during overseas missions, who stayed when PSD made him difficult to live with. And yet she had kept this, all of this. The thought hurt. Not because of the secret itself, because he didn't understand why. Shadow rested his head on Ethan's knee. The familiar weight grounded him, steady, loyal, present, unlike memories, unlike grief, unlike questions. Ethan scratched behind the dog's ears. Did you know about this? Shadow's tail moved once. The old dog looked strangely satisfied, as though one step of a mission had finally been completed. That thought made Ethan pause. A mission, the word fit, the maps, the coordinates, the hidden note, the key. Everything about the box felt organized, planned, intentional. Not random keepsakes, not forgotten memories. A trail. Sarah had left a trail, and somehow Shadow seemed determined to make sure Ethan followed it. Hours passed. The rain stopped completely. Clouds drifted apart above the mountains. Patches of sunlight touched distant ridges. The Smokies glowed green and gold beneath the changing sky. Ethan spread the maps across the dashboard. Every road, every trail, every marking. All of them seemed to point toward the same place, Fire Tower Ridge. He traced the route with one finger. Deep wilderness, remote country, far from tourists, far from towns, far from everything. Exactly the kind of place Sarah had never mentioned. Exactly the kind of place that demanded answers. Shadow suddenly climbed into the passenger's seat. He sat upright, facing the windshield, facing the mountains, ready, waiting. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. The ridges stretched across the horizon, silent, ancient, holding secrets older than memory. And somewhere among them stood a tower Sarah had visited for decades, a tower she believed would explain everything. Ethan folded the maps carefully, placed the photographs back into the cedar box, then slipped the brass key into his jacket pocket. The blue stone felt unexpectedly warm against his fingers. A strange feeling settled inside him, part grief, part fear, part curiosity. Something was waiting in those mountains, something Sarah had protected for years, something important enough to hide from the man she loved most. Shadow stood, ready to go. Ethan stared toward the distant ridges one final time. The mystery had stopped being about the box. Now it was about Sarah herself. Who had she really been before she became Sarah Cole? And why had she spent decades preparing a path that only Ethan and Shadow could follow? The mountains held the answer, and by sunset tomorrow, Ethan intended to start looking for it. The next morning arrived cold and clear. The rain had washed the sky clean. Sunlight spilled across the Smoky Mountains, turning distant ridges gold along their edges, while shadows still rested in the valleys below. Ethan stood beside the truck in the parking lot. The air smelled of pine, wet earth, and approaching autumn. For the first time in months, he had a destination. That realization felt strange. Purpose had become unfamiliar. Ever since Sarah's death, each day had simply been something to survive. Wake up, keep moving, avoid thinking too much, sleep when exhaustion finally won, repeat. Now there was a direction, a place on a map, a question waiting for an answer. Shadow seemed to sense it. The old German shepherd paced beside the truck with unusual energy. His ears remained alert. His eyes constantly searched the mountains beyond town. Ethan folded the maps carefully and placed them inside a weatherproof pouch. The brass key rested in his jacket pocket. The blue stone attached to it tapped softly against his chest as he moved. He checked the truck. Fuel was low. Oil was acceptable. The tires were worn but usable. The vehicle looked exactly like what it was. An aging machine refusing to quit, much like its owner. By 7 o'clock they were on the road. Gatlinburg disappeared behind them. Tourist shops gave way to winding mountain highways. Then smaller roads, then narrower roads. The mountains rose around them, layer after layer, green, blue, gray, ancient. The farther Ethan drove, the fewer people he saw. Soon there were no houses, no businesses, no traffic, only wilderness. Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat, watching, always watching. The map indicated an abandoned logging road branching away from the main route. It was barely visible. A narrow dirt track disappearing between trees. Ethan almost missed it. The truck bounced violently as he turned onto it. Loose stones rattled beneath the tires. Branches brushed the sides. The road climbed steadily upward. An hour later, civilization felt impossibly far away. The forest thickened. Towering hardwoods blocked much of the sunlight. Moss covered fallen logs. Small streams crossed the road at irregular intervals. Everything felt older here, untouched, forgotten. The isolation reminded Ethan of places he had seen overseas, remote valleys, hidden terrain, areas where maps mattered more than roads. Without warning, a memory surfaced. A mountain patrol years ago. Heavy packs, radio static, the smell of dust and gun oil, the tension of never knowing what waited around the next bend. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. His breathing changed, faster, shallower. PTSD rarely announced itself. It simply arrived. The forest around him vanished. For a moment he was somewhere else, somewhere far away. A younger version of himself moved through hostile terrain with teammates beside him. Every sound carried danger. Every shadow demanded attention. Every step required caution. Ethan, the voice wasn't real, but it felt real. He blinked hard. The memory shattered. The mountain road returned. The trees, the sunlight, the truck, shadow. The dog had placed a paw on Ethan's arm, grounding him, steadying him, bringing him back. Ethan exhaled slowly. Thanks, partner. Shadow's tail moved once. The old dog understood things no training manual could explain. They continued climbing. Around noon, the road ended. Ahead stood a rusted gate, locked, abandoned. The forest had already begun reclaiming it. According to the map, the tower was still several miles beyond. Ethan grabbed a backpack. Water, flashlight, maps, the key. Everything else stayed behind. Shadow jumped down from the truck immediately. Ready. The trail beyond the gate barely existed. Tall grass swallowed sections of it. Roots twisted across the ground. Birdsong echoed through the trees. The farther they walked, the quieter Ethan became. Not because he was afraid, because something about this place felt important. As though Sarah had left pieces of herself here. The thought followed him through every mile. Hours passed. The trail climbed steadily, higher, steeper. The mountains opened occasionally, revealing breathtaking views of endless ridges rolling toward the horizon. Cloud shadows drifted across the valleys. Hawks circled above distant peaks. The beauty almost hurt. Sarah would have loved this. Then another realization struck him. Maybe she already had. Maybe that was the point. Around mid-afternoon, Shadow stopped, instantly, without warning. Every muscle in his body tightened. The dog's ears rose. His nose lifted into the air. Ethan immediately noticed. Years of working together had taught him to trust these signals. Something had changed. The forest felt different. Still, too still. Even the birds seemed quieter. Ethan crouched. "What is it?" Shadow moved forward slowly. Not frightened, focused, alert. They advanced another 100 yards. Then Ethan saw it. A fresh tire track, pressed deeply into soft mud beside the trail. Not old, not weathered, recent, very recent. His stomach tightened. No vehicles were supposed to be up here. The road ended miles below. He studied the impression carefully. The tread pattern remained sharp, less than a day old, possibly less than several hours. Shadow sniffed the ground, then growled softly, a sound Ethan rarely heard. Someone else had been here recently. The realization changed everything. Up until this moment, Sarah's mystery had belonged to the past. Old photographs, old maps, old secrets. Now the present had entered the story. Someone was still coming here. Someone still cared. Someone was searching. For what? The question lingered as they continued. An hour later, the forest finally opened. The ridge appeared, and there it was, the tower. Ethan stopped walking. For several seconds he simply stared. The structure stood atop the mountain like a forgotten sentinel. Tall, weathered, silent. Wooden beams darkened by decades of storms. Windows reflecting sunlight. A narrow staircase wrapped around one side. Time had scarred it, but it still stood, exactly like the photographs. The same tower, the same mountain, the same secret. A strange sensation moved through Ethan. Part awe, part grief, part wonder. Sarah had stood here. Many times, maybe dozens, maybe hundreds. While he remained completely unaware, Shadow started forward, then stopped again, growling, this time louder. Ethan followed the dog's gaze, near the tower entrance. Fresh footprints, several sets, not Sarah's, not decades old, current, recent. The dirt around the foundation showed clear signs of activity. Someone had visited, perhaps yesterday, perhaps this morning. A chill moved down Ethan's spine. He walked closer. The footprints circled the tower. Some led inside, others disappeared into the woods. He examined them carefully. Boots, large sizes, more than one person. The realization settled heavily. Whoever they weren't casual hikers. They had come here deliberately, for a reason, the same reason Sarah had, the same reason Ethan had. The mystery was alive, very much alive. The wind moved through the trees. The tower creaked softly. Shadow remained tense beside him, watching the forest, watching the shadows, watching for movement. Ethan placed one hand on the weathered wood of the tower. The boards felt cold beneath his fingers. For a moment, he imagined Sarah standing here, looking out across the mountains, keeping secrets he never knew existed, following a mission she never explained. The betrayal still lingered, but another feeling was growing beside it. Curiosity, a powerful need to understand. The answer was close now. He could feel it. Inside this tower, inside whatever Sarah had hidden, inside whatever others were still searching for. Shadow suddenly moved toward the entrance, without hesitation, without fear. The old shepherd climbed the first step and looked back, waiting. The same look he had given beside the cedar box. The same look that seemed to say, "Come on, we're not finished yet." Ethan glanced once more at the fresh tire tracks below the ridge, then at the footprints circling the structure. Whoever had been here might return. Soon. The thought added urgency to everything. The mountains had finally revealed the tower. But the tower had revealed something even more unsettling. Sarah's secret wasn't buried, it wasn't forgotten, and it wasn't safe. Someone else was hunting for it too. And Ethan had a growing feeling they would not appreciate him finding it first. Together, Ethan and Shadow stepped toward the tower entrance. Whatever Sarah had hidden waited inside. and neither of them yet understood how much their lives were about to change. The old wooden door groaned as Ethan pushed it open. Dust drifted through beams of afternoon sunlight. The air inside smelled of aged timber, dry leaves, and decades of silence. Shadow entered first. His paws moved quietly across the weathered floorboards. The German Shepherd paused every few feet, carefully studying the room. The interior of the lookout tower was larger than Ethan expected. A narrow staircase wound upward toward the observation deck. Old cabinets lined one wall. A rusted wood stove sat in the corner. Several broken chairs remained scattered throughout the room. At first glance, the place looked abandoned, forgotten, left behind by time. But the fresh footprints told a different story. Someone had been here recently, very recently. Ethan moved slowly. His military instincts had never fully disappeared. He studied every detail, every doorway, every shadow, every possible exit. Years of training still lived beneath the surface. PTSD and age had changed many things. Awareness wasn't one of them. Shadow suddenly stopped near a cabinet. The dog lowered his nose and sniffed carefully, then looked toward Ethan. The same signal, the same certainty. Ethan approached. The cabinet appeared ordinary. Dust coated its surface. One hinge hung loose, nothing unusual. Then he noticed faint scratches near the bottom. Fresh scratches, recent. Someone had moved it, recently. His pulse quickened. He grabbed the side of the cabinet and pulled. The heavy piece scraped across the floor. Behind it sat a narrow opening cut into the wall, a hidden compartment. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared. Sarah, what exactly had you been doing? Inside the compartment rested a stack of leather-bound journals, 12 of them, neatly arranged, protected from moisture, protected from time, protected from everyone, until now. Ethan carefully lifted the first journal. The cover felt worn from years of handling. When he opened it, he immediately recognized the handwriting. Sarah, page after page, year after year. His chest tightened. For a moment he couldn't continue. Hearing someone's voice after death was difficult. Reading their private thoughts felt almost sacred, almost intrusive. Yet Sarah had clearly wanted him to find them. Otherwise, they would never have been hidden here. He sat down near the window. Shadow settled beside him. The mountain wind whispered softly through cracks in the walls. Then Ethan began reading. The earliest entries dated back more than 30 years, long before retirement, long before illness, long before any of the struggles that eventually consumed their lives. At first, the entries seemed simple. Descriptions of mountain trails, weather observations, notes about wildlife, conversations with local residents. But deeper into the journal, the tone changed. Names appeared repeatedly: land records, property boundaries, family histories, court documents. Sarah wasn't keeping a diary. She was conducting an investigation. The realization sent a chill through him. Hours passed. The sunlight shifted. Shadows stretched across the floor. Ethan barely noticed. He continued reading. One journal became two. Two became three. A picture slowly emerged. Decades earlier, Sarah's grandfather had owned thousands of acres throughout the mountains surrounding the ridge. The land had belonged to local families for generations. Then everything changed. Records disappeared. Ownership transferred. Legal documents surfaced under questionable circumstances. Powerful business interests gradually absorbed the property. Families lost homes. Farms vanished. Entire communities were displaced. Most people eventually accepted the losses. Sarah never did. The journals revealed years of research, county archives, historical surveys, property records, witness statements. Sarah had quietly spent decades gathering evidence, building a case, following a trail no one else seemed willing to pursue. Ethan stopped reading. His hands trembled slightly. Not from age, from disbelief. None of this matched the woman he thought he knew. Sarah had always appeared content, practical, grounded, never obsessed, never consumed by hidden missions, and yet here was proof. 30 years of secret work, 30 years of deception, 30 years of silence. The realization hurt more than Ethan expected. He stared through the tower window. The mountains stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sun, beautiful, quiet, ancient. For a moment anger surfaced, sharp, unexpected. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question echoed inside him. Why 45 years? 45 years together. He had shared combat memories he barely trusted himself with. Shared fears, failures, nightmares, everything. And she had carried this alone. The betrayal wasn't logical, but emotions rarely were. Shadow lifted his head. The dog sensed the change immediately. Ethan reached down and scratched behind his ears. The familiar gesture helped steady him. A few minutes later, he resumed reading. But the later journals revealed something even more surprising. Sarah hadn't simply researched the land. She had visited these mountains constantly, year after year. Dozens of trips, hundreds of days. Entire chapters of her life had unfolded here. Trips Ethan always believed were ordinary volunteer projects. Historical society meetings, library conferences, community events. The explanations had never seemed suspicious. Now they looked completely different. The realization left him unsettled. A life hidden inside another life. A mission concealed inside a marriage. As sunset approached, Ethan discovered a sealed envelope tucked between two journal volumes. His name appeared on the front, nothing else. His pulse accelerated. Carefully, he opened it. Inside rested a single page. Sarah's handwriting filled only half of it. "Ethan, if you've reached this point, you're probably angry. You have every right to be. There are things I should have told you sooner. But before you judge what I did, please understand why I did it. Some promises take longer than a lifetime to keep. I wasn't protecting secrets from you. I was protecting them for you. Please keep reading. Love always." Sarah. Ethan stared at the page. The words landed heavily. Protecting them for you. What did that even mean? The answer wasn't here, not yet. But Sarah clearly knew how he would react. She anticipated his anger. She expected his questions. Somehow that made her absence feel even more present. The sun dipped lower. Orange light flooded the tower. Shadow suddenly stood. His ears rose. Every muscle tightened. Instantly, Ethan noticed. The old shepherd moved toward the window overlooking the forest. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Ethan crossed the room quickly. Below the ridge, partially hidden among the trees, sat a dark SUV, parked, watching. The vehicle definitely hadn't been there earlier. Someone had arrived. Someone else was interested in the tower. And they were close. Very close. Ethan's instincts immediately activated. The peaceful afternoon vanished. Every sense sharpened. Every detail mattered. The SUV remained motionless. Its windows reflected the dying sunlight. No occupants were visible. Yet its presence felt deliberate, uncomfortable, threatening. Shadow continued, growling softly. Ethan looked from the vehicle to the journals, then back again. Whoever those people were, they might already know about Sarah's research. They might already know about the tower. And if they did, they might not appreciate someone uncovering what she had spent decades hiding. The mountain suddenly felt much smaller. The mystery suddenly felt much larger. And for the first time since opening the cedar box, Ethan realized something important. Sarah's secret wasn't merely historical. It wasn't merely personal. It wasn't finished. Someone was still protecting it, or perhaps trying to bury it. The SUV remained below the ridge, silent, patient, waiting. Just like the people in Sarah's journals. Just like the questions she left behind. As darkness slowly settled across the Smoky Mountains, Ethan closed the final journal for the day. One truth had become impossible to ignore. The woman he loved had been living a second mission for decades, and the deeper he ventured into it, the less certain he became that he had ever truly known her at all. Night settled over the Smoky Mountains with surprising speed. One moment the ridges glowed beneath the last orange light of sunset. The next, Darkness flowed through the valleys like rising water. Ethan remained inside the tower. The journals sat stacked beside him. Shadow lay near the door, watching, listening. The SUV below the ridge had not moved. Its dark shape remained visible through gaps in the trees, waiting. Hours passed. The temperature dropped. Wind whispered against the tower walls. The old structure creaked softly, as if remembering every storm it had ever survived. Ethan built a small fire in the rusted stove using fallen branches gathered nearby. The warmth helped. The silence did not. His thoughts kept returning to Sarah. The hidden trips, the journals, the decades of secrecy, the questions. Most painful of all was the realization that she had carried this burden alone. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she had chosen not to tell him. The distinction mattered, and somehow made it hurt more. Shadow suddenly lifted his head, instantly alert. Ethan noticed. The old shepherd's ears stood upright, his gaze fixed on something outside. Then came the sound. A vehicle engine, far away. But approaching slowly, Ethan moved toward the window. Below the ridge, headlights appeared through the trees. The SUV was leaving. Its lights wound down the mountain road before finally disappearing into darkness. Only then did Shadow relax. Ethan watched until the last glow vanished. Someone had spent hours observing the tower. That fact stayed with him long after the vehicle disappeared. Morning arrived cold and bright. Sunlight spilled across the mountains. Mist drifted through the valleys. The beauty of it felt almost unreal. Yet Ethan woke with unease. The SUV, the footprints, the hidden journals. Something larger was moving beneath the surface. He packed carefully. The journals went into a waterproof duffel. The maps followed. Nothing stayed behind. Not anymore. By mid-morning, he and Shadow had returned to the truck. The descent from the ridge took longer than expected. Ethan's mind remained occupied. Questions piled on top of questions. Then his phone rang. The sudden sound startled him. Few people ever called anymore. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Normally, he would have ignored it. Something told him not to. Ethan Cole. A calm voice answered. Professional, controlled. Mr. Cole, my name is Daniel Price. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Randall Mercer. The name meant nothing, at least initially. Ethan remained silent. The man continued, Mr. Mercer would like to discuss certain materials recently discovered at Fire Tower Ridge. Every muscle in Ethan's body tightened. The tower, the journals, the SUV. Suddenly everything connected. How do you know about that? A brief pause. Mr. Mercer has extensive interests throughout the region. Not an answer, a deflection. Ethan recognized it immediately. Military briefings had taught him how people avoided telling the truth. Tell Mr. Mercer I'm not interested. Mr. Cole, I strongly suggest you reconsider, Mr. Mercer is prepared to offer substantial compensation. Compensation for what? Another pause. For anything you may have recovered from the property. There it was. Not curiosity, not concern, a purchase. Someone wanted Sarah's research. Badly. Ethan's voice hardened. I'm not selling anything. The line grew quiet. Then the man spoke again. Softer this time. Almost pathetic. You should understand something. Certain historical matters are better left in the past. Ethan ended the call. Immediately. The truck filled with silence. Shadow glanced toward him. The old shepherd sensed the tension instantly. Ethan stared through the windshield. His heartbeat had accelerated, not from fear, from anger. Someone was already trying to control what he found, which meant Sarah's investigation mattered. Perhaps more than he realized. The mountains rolled past outside, endless ridges, deep forests, hidden histories, and apparently hidden enemies. That afternoon, Ethan stopped at a small diner outside Sevierville. The place looked unchanged since the 1980s. Red booths, chrome stools, coffee always brewing. The waitress called everyone honey. Shadow rested beneath the table, while Ethan reviewed more of Sarah's journals. The deeper he read, the clearer one name became. Mercer. The name appeared repeatedly. Not Randall Mercer, his father, and before that his grandfather. 3 generations, developers, land investors, influential businessmen. Each generation tied somehow to the gradual disappearance of mountain properties Sarah had been tracking. Ethan closed the journal slowly. The coincidence felt impossible. Outside the diner, clouds gathered. A storm threatened. Inside, something colder settled in Ethan's chest. Sarah hadn't been investigating random land disputes. She had been following a family, a powerful one. The same family now contacting him. The same family watching the tower. The same family trying to buy silence. The realization made his decision easy. He would not sell, not now, not ever. The drive continued until evening. Rain began again shortly before sunset. Heavy drops hammered the truck roof. Visibility shrank. The mountains disappeared behind curtains of gray. Ethan eventually pulled into a small campground near the national forest. A handful of RVs occupied distant sites. Otherwise, the place was empty. Perfect. He parked beneath a stand of tall pines. The rain intensified. Thunder rolled somewhere far away. Shadow climbed into the passenger seat while Ethan organized the journals. Hours later, darkness fully arrived. The campground became silent. Rain continued. The steady sound almost soothing. Almost, then, Shadow growled. A deep sound, low, dangerous. Ethan froze. The dog was staring through the side window. Into the darkness, his ears were forward, his body tense, instantly ready. Ethan reached for the flashlight. Outside, movement, brief, almost invisible. A shadow passes between trees. His pulse accelerated. The movement returned, closer. Someone was approaching the truck, slowly, carefully. Rain masked most sounds, but not all. A footstep, then another. Shadow's growl intensified. The old shepherd moved toward the door. Every instinct screamed warning. The person outside reached the truck. A hand touched the rear handle, testing it. Then the side compartment. Then another door. Searching. Looking for something, the journals. The realization struck immediately. Someone knew exactly what Ethan had taken from the tower. The handle moved again. Harder. Shadow exploded into motion. The German shepherd launched against the door with a thunderous bark. The sudden sound shattered the silence. Outside, the figure jerked backward. A flashlight beam flashed briefly across the rain. Then movement, fast. The person fled toward the trees. Shadow continued barking. Furious, protective. Without hesitation, Ethan opened the door. The rain hit him immediately. Cold, heavy, relentless. A figure disappeared through the forest. Too distant to identify, too fast to catch. But not before something happened. A sharp yelp erupted beside him. Shadow. Ethan spun around. The dog stood near the truck, breathing hard. One front leg lifted slightly. Blood mixed with rainwater near his shoulder. Not much, but enough. Enough to make Ethan's heart drop. Someone had injured his dog. Not seriously, not fatally, but intentionally. The realization ignited something deep inside him. A cold anger. Different from grief, different from sadness, cleaner, focused. The same feeling he once carried on dangerous missions. Someone had followed him. Someone had searched his truck. Someone had tried to steal Sarah's work. And when Shadow protected it, they hurt him. Ethan knelt beside the dog. "It's okay." Shadow licked his hand. Still alert, still watching the forest. Still protecting him. Even injured. The loyalty hit Ethan harder than expected. The old shepherd had already given years of service. Years of sacrifice. Yet he remained exactly what he had always been. A guardian, a partner, a friend. The rain continued falling. Thunder rolled across the mountains. Ethan carefully cleaned the wound inside the truck. Fortunately, it appeared shallow, painful, but manageable. Shadow never complained, never pulled away, never stopped watching the darkness beyond the glass. Hours later, after the wound was wrapped, Ethan sat awake. The journals rested beside him. The mountains disappeared into storm and darkness. His grief had carried him through the first part of the journey. Curiosity had carried him through the second. Now something else had taken hold. determination. Someone wanted Sarah's secret buried. Someone wanted the truth hidden. And someone was willing to go further than he had expected. Ethan looked at Shadow sleeping lightly beside him, the bandage visible beneath the dim cabin light. The sight hardened his resolve. This was no longer only about Sarah, no longer only about answers. It was personal now, because somewhere in the darkness beyond those mountains was a man named Randall Mercer. And Ethan had a growing feeling that Mercer knew exactly what Sarah had been trying to uncover. The question was why, and the answer, Ethan suspected, was hidden somewhere deeper inside the mountain than either of them had yet discovered. The storm finally moved east sometime after midnight. By dawn, the mountains were dripping beneath a pale silver sky. Mist clung to the valleys. Water rolled from pine branches in slow droplets. The campground remained quiet. Most people were still asleep. Ethan wasn't. He hadn't slept much. The attempted break-in kept replaying through his mind. So did the sight of Shadow's blood mixing with rainwater. The old German shepherd rested on a blanket spread across the truck seat. His bandaged shoulder rose and fell steadily. When Ethan reached over to check the wound, Shadow opened one eye. Immediately alert, immediately ready, even injured. A faint smile crossed Ethan's face. "You've always been stubborn." Shadow's tail thumped once. The familiar sound eased something inside him. For months after Sarah's death, Ethan had felt like a man drifting through fog. Now the fog was beginning to thin. Pain remained. Grief remained. But purpose had entered the picture. Purpose changes everything. He poured coffee from a small thermos and opened one of Sarah's journals. Several pages near the end caught his attention. The entries became shorter, more urgent, less focused on history, more focused on directions, instructions, locations, repeated references to the tower itself, not the land, not the records, the tower. A particular entry stopped him cold. "If anything happens before I can explain, he will know where to look." Shadow always notices what people miss. Ethan stared at the sentence, then looked at the dog. The words felt impossible, almost absurd. Yet Sarah had written them years ago, long before illness, long before the foreclosure, long before her death, as if she had been planning for something, preparing for something. The feeling unsettled him. By mid-morning they were heading back toward Fire Tower Ridge. The roads remained muddy from the storm. Clouds drifted low across the mountains. The world looked washed clean. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were still watching. Mercer, the name lingered in his thoughts. The call, the SUV, the intruder, all signs pointed toward the same conclusion. Someone wanted Sarah's work, desperately. That meant whatever remained hidden was valuable, not necessarily financially, but important. The tower appeared shortly after noon, standing alone against the sky, silent as ever. Shadow became visibly excited the moment they approached. Despite the injured shoulder, the dog moved faster than Ethan expected. The old shepherd practically pulled him toward the entrance. Inside, the tower remained exactly as they left it. Dust. Wood, silence, the journals, nothing disturbed, at least not visibly. Ethan spent hours searching, cabinets, drawers, storage spaces, ceiling beams, nothing. No new clues, no hidden compartments, no answers. The frustration slowly grew. By late afternoon, sunlight streamed through the windows at a lower angle. Long shadows stretched across the floor. Ethan sat against one wall and rubbed his eyes. "Maybe we've already found everything." The words sounded hollow even to him. Shadow immediately stood. The dog limped slightly, but his determination remained unchanged. He crossed the room, stopped near the center, then began scratching at the floor. Once, twice, 3 times. Ethan watched. At first he ignored it. Dogs scratch floors. Dogs investigate smells, nothing unusual. Then Shadow returned to the exact same spot again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The old shepherd looked back, waiting. Ethan's pulse quickened. He knew that look. Years ago on deployment, Shadow had once refused to move from a dirt road in Afghanistan. The entire patrol became irritated. Everyone except Ethan. He trusted the dog. Minutes later, they discovered buried explosives. Shadow had saved lives that day. Now he wore the same expression, the same certainty. Ethan slowly stood. "What do you have?" Shadow scratched again. The floorboards appeared ordinary, weathered, aged, nothing remarkable. Yet something felt different. Ethan knelt down. His fingers traced the wood grain, then stopped. One board sat slightly higher than the others, barely noticeable, invisible unless you were searching, or unless you were a German shepherd determined to find it. His heartbeat accelerated. He grabbed a pry bar from his pack, carefully inserted it beneath the edge. The board resisted, then shifted. Dust rose. A second board followed, then a third. Beneath them rested a narrow cavity hidden inside the floor. Ethan froze. For several seconds he simply stared. Shadow sat beside him, watching, as though he had known all along. Inside the compartment rested a weathered metal container. Rectangular, sealed, protected from moisture, protected from time, protected from everyone. Until now, Ethan lifted it carefully. The container felt surprisingly heavy. His hands trembled slightly. Not from age, from anticipation. He opened the latch. Inside lay dozens of documents. Property deeds, survey maps, photographs, folders. And beneath everything else, several cassette tapes. Each one labeled in Sarah's handwriting. For Ethan, the words hit harder than anything else. For Ethan, not for lawyers, not for historians, not for courts, for him. His throat tightened. Slowly, he picked up the first tape. A portable tape player rested beneath it, battery-powered, old, simple, ready. As if Sarah had expected exactly this moment, Ethan inserted the cassette, pressed play. Static filled the room. Then came a voice. Soft, warm, familiar. Sarah. For a moment he couldn't breathe. 3 months. 3 months without hearing her voice. 3 months of silence. And suddenly she was here. Not really, but enough. "Hello, Ethan." The sound nearly broke him. He lowered his head, closed his eyes, listened. "If you're hearing this, then Shadow did his job." A weak laugh escaped through his tears. Beside him, Shadow tilted his head. Sarah continued. "I know you're probably angry, maybe confused, maybe both." The tape crackled softly. "I wish I could explain this in person." Ethan swallowed hard. Every word felt like a knife and a gift at the same time. "I never wanted secrets between us. But some promises take years to finish, longer than I expected." The mountains outside disappeared. The tower disappeared. Everything disappeared except Sarah's voice. "I trusted one thing more than anything else." A pause. "That Shadow would find what people miss." Ethan looked at the dog. The old shepherd remained beside him, steady, loyal, listening, just as Sarah had known he would. The tape continued. "What you're holding is bigger than the land, bigger than the mountain, bigger than me." Another pause. "If you're here, then someone else is probably looking too." The words immediately captured Ethan's attention. Sarah knew. Years ago she knew. The realization sent chills through him. "They'll try to make you quit." Static crackled. "They'll tell you it isn't worth it." Another pause. "Don't believe them." The tape ended. Silence returned. Only wind moved through the tower. Only the distant call of a hawk echoed across the ridge. Ethan sat motionless. The player rested in his lap. The documents surrounded him. His grief returned. But something else came with it. Hope. Not the fragile hope from the cedar box. Something stronger. Because Sarah had planned this. Every step, every clue, every journal, every map, every hidden compartment. And somehow she had trusted Shadow to lead him here. The realization transformed everything. This wasn't random. This wasn't luck. This was a trail. A deliberate trail. Built years before her death. Built for him. Built for this exact moment. The late afternoon sun poured through the tower windows. Golden light illuminated the hidden compartment. The documents. The tapes. The old dog sitting proudly beside them. Ethan reached over and wrapped one arm around Shadow's neck. The German shepherd leaned gently against him. Neither moved for a long time. Outside, the mountains stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Inside, Ethan finally understood one thing with absolute certainty. Sarah hadn't simply left behind answers. She had left behind a path, and the deeper he followed it, the more he realized she had been preparing him for a journey that wasn't about the past. It was about what came next. The only question now was how far ahead Sarah had truly planned. And judging by the hidden compartment beneath the tower floor, Ethan suspected the answer was much farther than he could yet imagine. The sun had already dropped behind the western ridges when Ethan finally left Fire Tower Ridge. The hidden documents, journals, and cassette tapes were packed securely in waterproof containers inside the truck. Shadow slept beside him. Exhaustion had finally overcome the old German shepherd. The bandaged shoulder rose and fell gently with each breath. For the first time since the attack at the campground, Ethan felt something close to relief. Not safety, not peace, but direction. Sarah had left him a trail, and every step of it seemed intentional. The mountain roads twisted through deep forest as dusk settled over the Smokies. Blue shadows stretched across the valleys. Fog gathered in low places. The landscape felt ancient, watchful, almost alive. An hour later, Ethan pulled into a gravel driveway beside a small cabin overlooking a mountain lake. The cabin sat alone among towering pines. Warm light glowed from the windows. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney. The place looked untouched by time. This was where Sarah's journals had directed him next. Walter Briggs. The name appeared repeatedly throughout her notes. A former forest ranger, a trusted friend, one of the few people who knew pieces of her secret. Ethan stepped out of the truck. The cold evening air carried the scent of pine needles and lake water. Before he could knock, the cabin door opened. A tall man stepped onto the porch, 70 years old perhaps, lean, weathered, gray beard, the kind of face shaped by decades outdoors. The man studied Ethan for several seconds. Then his eyes shifted toward Shadow. Something softened in his expression. "You're Ethan." It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded. "Walter Briggs?" The old ranger smiled faintly. "Sarah said you'd eventually show up." The words stopped Ethan cold, not because of what Walter said, because of how casually he said it. As though Sarah had simply stepped out yesterday. As though she weren't gone. Walter motioned toward the cabin. "You both look tired." The interior smelled of cedar, coffee, and wood smoke. Simple furniture, old photographs, fishing gear, maps covering one wall. The place felt lived in, comfortable, safe. Shadow immediately collapsed beside the fireplace. The old shepherd stretched out and sighed deeply. Walter crouched beside him, carefully examined the bandaged shoulder. "Looks clean," Ethan nodded. "He'll heal." Walter scratched behind Shadow's ears. The dog accepted it without hesitation, a rare sign of trust. Animals usually judged character faster than people. They sat at a wooden table near the window. Outside, moonlight reflected across the lake. Silver ripples moved slowly through the darkness. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Walter poured coffee. Ethan stared into the cup. Finally, he asked the question that had been haunting him. "How much did you know?" Walter's eyes lowered. He already understood what Ethan meant. Not everything. A pause. But more than most. The answer wasn't satisfying. Ethan looked away. His emotions had become complicated. Anger, grief, curiosity, admiration, betrayal. All tangled together. Walter seemed to notice. "You're trying to decide whether Sarah lied to you." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Walter already knew. The old ranger leaned back in his chair. The fire crackled softly nearby. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Then Walter spoke. "She loved you more than anyone I've ever known." The statement came without hesitation, without uncertainty. Absolute. Ethan looked up. Walter continued. "Everything she did was because she believed one day you'd need this place." The words hung in the room. Ethan frowned. This place? Walter gestured toward the mountains outside, the ridge, the land, everything. The confusion on Ethan's face deepened. Walter stood and crossed to a bookshelf. After a moment, he returned carrying a worn notebook. Not one of Sarah's journals. Something different. He placed it carefully on the table. She gave me this 12 years ago. Ethan opened it. His breath caught immediately. Every page contained notes about him. Not military records, not personal history. Observations, thoughts, concerns. Sarah's handwriting filled each page. Ethan likes water. When his nightmares get bad, he always sits near water. A lump formed in Ethan's throat. He turned another page. Mountain air helps him sleep, always has. Another. He needs purpose more than comfort. Another. If anything ever happens to me, don't let him disappear into grief. Ethan stopped reading. The room suddenly felt very quiet, very small, very personal, his eyes blurred. For several seconds he couldn't speak. Walter waited patiently. The old ranger understood. Some emotions require silence. Eventually Ethan managed a question. Why would she write this? Walter stared into the fire. Because she knew you. A simple answer. Yet it struck harder than anything else. The anger Ethan carried began to shift, not disappear, not completely, but change. The journals had revealed secrets. This notebook revealed something else. Attention. Sarah had been paying attention all along, to him, to his struggles, to his wounds, especially the invisible ones. Walter poured more coffee, then quietly added, "After your last deployment, she worried about you every day." Ethan looked down. The PSD had never been easy. Some nights were manageable, others weren't. Sarah had endured all of it, the nightmares, the anxiety, the isolation, the silence. And apparently she had been preparing for something far beyond either of them. The notebook continued. Page after page, year after year, noting small details, things Ethan never realized she noticed. His habits, his fears, his strengths, his weaknesses. The effect was overwhelming. The woman he thought he knew was becoming someone entirely different. Not because she had changed, because he was finally seeing everything. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Shadow slept soundly near the hearth. Outside, moonlight drifted across the lake. Eventually, Walter stood and retrieved another item, a sealed envelope. This one addressed directly to Ethan. Sarah's handwriting, again. Ethan stared at it. The sight still hurt, still comforted, still felt impossible. Walter placed it gently on the table. She told me not to give that to anyone else. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside rested a single letter. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. The handwriting remained unmistakable. My Ethan, if you're reading this, then Walter finally ignored my instructions and gave you the letter. That made Ethan laugh despite himself. A small laugh, but real. The first in months, he continued. You probably think this story is about land. It's not. You probably think it's about money. It isn't. It's about people. And it's about purpose. Most of all, it's about you. The words blurred briefly. He blinked away the moisture. I know what happens when grief finds you. I've watched you fight it before. After deployments, after losses, after things you never fully talk about. You survive. But surviving isn't the same as living. The room disappeared again. Only Sarah's words remained. If you're reading this, then I need you to do something for me. Keep moving forward. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because there are people you'll help someday. People neither of us have met yet. The letter ended there. No dramatic farewell. No final declaration. Just Sarah. Direct, practical, hopeful. The way she had always been. Ethan folded the letter slowly. His chest felt heavy, but not in the same way as before. The grief remained. Yet something else existed beside it now. Understanding. Or perhaps the beginning of it. Outside the cabin, the lake reflected a sky filled with stars. Inside, Walter quietly gathered the empty coffee cups. Neither man spoke. Words seemed unnecessary. The silence itself felt meaningful. Healing sometimes begins that way. Not with answers, not with victory, but with perspective. For the first time since Sarah's death, Ethan no longer felt like a man whose story had ended. He felt like a man standing at the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. Shadow stirred in his sleep. The old shepherd's paws twitched slightly. Dreaming, perhaps remembering younger days, or perhaps simply resting after another successful mission. Ethan reached down and rested a hand on the dog's neck. Warm, steady, present. The mountains beyond the lake stood dark against the stars. Somewhere beyond them, Sarah's trail continued. And, for the first time, Ethan began to understand something that changed everything. Sarah had never been preparing the mountain for herself. She had been preparing it for him. The question was why. And somewhere out there, hidden beyond the next clue, the answer was waiting. The answer nearly vanished in fire 3 nights later. The morning after Ethan arrived at Walter Briggs's lakeside cabin passed quietly. For the first time in months, he slept through the night. No nightmares, no sudden awakenings. No memories dragging him back into places he'd spent years trying to leave behind. The mountains outside Walter's cabin seemed to hold a different kind of silence. Not emptiness, peace. Shadow's shoulder was healing well. The old German shepherd moved more easily now. Though he still favored the injured leg slightly, his eyes remained sharp and alert. By afternoon, Ethan had spread Sarah's recovered documents across Walter's dining table. Maps, property surveys, photographs, handwritten notes, cassette recordings. The evidence filled nearly every available surface. Walter stood beside him studying one of the survey maps. She spent 30 years building this. Ethan nodded. The realization still amazed him. Every page revealed more planning, more patience, more determination. Sarah had never been chasing revenge. That much was becoming clear. Her notes repeatedly mentioned conservation, preservation, protection. She wanted the mountain saved, not owned, not exploited, protected. Walter tapped a section of one survey. This ridgeline here. Ethan looked closer. The boundary wrapped around Fire Tower Ridge, then extended much farther than he realized. Thousands of acres. Dense forest, streams, wildlife corridors, untouched land. The scale surprised him. Sarah's project had always been bigger than one tower, bigger than one mountain. The phone call came shortly before sunset. Walter answered. His expression changed immediately. Concern, urgency. Then he handed the phone to Ethan. "It's Deputy Carson." Ethan accepted the phone. "Mr. Cole?" The deputy sounded breathless. "Yes, there's a problem." Every nerve in Ethan's body tightened. "What kind of problem?" A brief pause. Then the answer. "There's a fire on Fire Tower Ridge." The world seemed to stop. For a moment, Ethan couldn't process the words. A fire. At the tower. The same tower containing Sarah's journals. The same tower hiding decades of evidence. The same tower someone had already been watching. His stomach dropped. "How bad?" "We don't know yet." The deputy sounded frustrated. "It's isolated. Fire crews are trying to reach it." Ethan didn't wait for more. The phone was already lowering. His mind was moving ahead. The tower, the documents, the hidden compartment, the evidence. The answer came instantly. This wasn't an accident. Walter saw it in Ethan's face. So do I. Neither man needed to say more. Within minutes, Ethan and Shadow were in the truck. The engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed behind them. The mountains blurred past beneath the fading evening light. Clouds gathered overhead. The air felt dry, too dry, dangerously dry. As they climbed toward the ridge, a faint orange glow appeared against the horizon. Then smoke. Dark. Rising. The sight tightened Ethan's chest. Not fear, urgency. The tower wasn't just wood anymore. It was Sarah's voice. Her mission. Her legacy. Everything she spent 30 years protecting. And someone was trying to erase it. The road narrowed, then ended. Ethan parked, grabbed his pack. Shadow jumped down beside him. Without hesitation, they started up the trail. The climb felt endless. Smoke thickened. Ash drifted through the trees. The orange glow intensified. Then came the smell. Burning timber, burning forest, burning history. By the time they reached the final section of the ridge, flames were visible. The sight stopped Ethan cold. Fire had already reached the tower. Orange tongues climbed the lower supports. Smoke poured through broken windows. Sparks spiraled upward into the darkening sky. The structure still stood, but not for long. Several volunteer firefighters were attempting to contain the blaze. The terrain made everything difficult. Water supplies were limited. Access was nearly impossible. A firefighter spotted Ethan. "Stay back!" Ethan ignored him. His eyes were fixed on the tower, the hidden compartment, the remaining tapes, the documents. Most had already been removed, but not all. One cassette remained, the final tape, Sarah's last recording. He had left it hidden temporarily while organizing the evidence. A terrible mistake. The realization hit him like a punch. The tape was still inside. The firefighter grabbed his arm. "You can't go in there." Ethan looked toward the burning structure, then toward Shadow. The old shepherd was already staring at the tower, focused, determined. The same look from the cedar box. The same look from beneath the floorboards. No hesitation, no fear, only purpose. The decision made itself. Ethan pulled free, then ran. The heat hit immediately. Smoke burned his lungs. Flames crackled overhead. The tower groaned as burning beams shifted under pressure. Every instinct screamed danger. Every military lesson warned against entering unstable structures. He went anyway, because some things mattered more. Inside, visibility dropped instantly. Smoke filled the lower level. The air shimmered with heat. Burning debris crashed somewhere above. Ethan covered his mouth, moved quickly. The hidden compartment lay near the center floor. He reached it, dropped to one knee, pulled away the boards. The metal container remained. Inside, the final cassette. Still there, relief flooded him. Then came a sound. A terrible sound. Wood cracking, loud, violent, structural. The tower was failing. Ethan grabbed the cassette, turned toward the exit, then froze. Shadow the dog had followed him inside. The German shepherd stood near the staircase, and above him, part of a burning beam had collapsed. Not completely. Enough. Enough to trap him. Shadow struggled, but the beam pinned his injured side. The old shepherd didn't cry, didn't panic. He simply kept trying to free himself. Ethan's heart stopped. For one horrifying second, time vanished. The tower disappeared, the fire disappeared. Only Shadow remained, pinned, trapped, vulnerable. The scene triggered something deep inside him. A memory, not from the mountains, from years ago, a battlefield. Smoke, chaos, a teammate trapped beneath debris, the helplessness, the fear, the guilt. The PSD surged forward with brutal force. His vision narrowed, his breathing changed. The old panic returned, the old paralysis. For a moment Ethan couldn't move. Couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Then he heard Sarah's voice. Not real. Memory. 100 nights sitting beside him after nightmares. 100 mornings helping him through darkness. Keep moving forward, especially when it hurts. The words cut through everything. The panic, the memories, the fear. Ethan lunged forward. The beam was heavier than expected. Burning, unstable, dangerous. He grabbed it anyway. Pain shot through his hands. The heat scorched his skin. He pushed. Nothing. Again, still nothing. Shadow struggled beside him. The tower groaned. Another support beam cracked overhead. Time was running out. Ethan roared with effort. Every remaining ounce of strength surged into one final push. The beam shifted. An inch. Then another. Enough. Shadow pulled free, immediately. Without hesitation, the dog limped toward him. Together they ran. The exit appeared through smoke. Fire surrounded portions of the structure now. The heat became unbearable. Then suddenly fresh air, dark sky, cold wind. They burst from the doorway seconds before part of the observation deck collapsed inward. The sound echoed across the ridge. Firefighters shouted. Someone grabbed Ethan, pulled him farther back. Shadow collapsed beside him, breathing hard, exhausted, alive. The tower continued burning. Flames consumed decades of history. Wood Sarah had walked upon, rooms she had occupied, places she had protected. Ethan watched silently, his chest rising and falling. The final cassette rested in his hand, warm, intact, saved. Beside him, Shadow pressed against his leg. Still alive, still here. For several minutes, neither moved. The fire painted the night sky orange. Ash drifted across the ridge like falling snow. Walter eventually arrived. Then Deputy Carson. Both looked at Ethan, then at Shadow. Neither needed an explanation. The answer was obvious. The old German shepherd had nearly died protecting Sarah's secret. The realization settled heavily over everyone present. As the tower burned against the darkness, Ethan wrapped one arm around Shadow's neck. The dog leaned into him, steady, faithful, unbreakable. And for the first time since Sarah died, Ethan understood something terrifying. He thought losing Sarah had been the worst pain imaginable. Tonight proved he was wrong. Because for one terrible moment inside that burning tower, he had almost lost the last living being he loved. And that possibility hurt in ways even grief never had. The fire continued burning long into the night. But one thing had survived: the final cassette, the last message Sarah left behind. And somewhere inside it, Ethan suspected, waited another piece of the answer she had spent decades preparing him to find. The remains of Fire Tower Ridge smoldered for 2 days. Smoke still drifted from the blackened skeleton of the structure. When Ethan finally found the strength to listen to the final cassette, Walter's cabin sat quiet beneath a gray mountain sky. Rain tapped gently against the windows. The lake beyond the porch looked like polished steel. Shadow rested beside the fireplace. His injuries had healed enough that he could walk comfortably again, though the old shepherd still carried himself with the stiffness of age. Ethan sat alone at the dining table. The cassette player rested before him. Sarah's final tape waited inside. For several moments he simply stared at it. The last time he would hear her voice. The thought hurt more than he expected. Eventually he pressed play. Static crackled softly. Then Sarah spoke. "Hello again, Ethan." The familiar warmth in her voice immediately filled the room. "I hoped I'd have more time." A pause. "I guess life had other plans." Ethan lowered his eyes. The ache never fully left. "Not really," Sarah continued. "If you've reached this recording, then the tower is probably gone." His head lifted. Gone. She knew. Years ago she knew. The realization sent chills through him. "I don't mean I predicted exactly what would happen," Sarah said with a faint laugh. "I just knew that buildings don't last forever. That's why the real secret was never hidden inside the tower." Ethan sat forward. Every word mattered now. "The real secret is inside the deeds." The room suddenly felt smaller, quieter, more focused, Sarah continued. "Most people think the mountain was stolen once and forgotten. That's not true." A brief pause. "I spent 30 years rebuilding something. Not documenting, not preserving, rebuilding." Ethan frowned. The distinction mattered. Sarah's voice softened. "I never wanted revenge. I wanted restoration." Then came the sentence that changed everything. "I already own most of the mountain." Silence followed. The tape continued. But Ethan barely heard the next few seconds. His mind struggled to process the words. Own most of the mountain. Sarah. His Sarah. The woman who clipped grocery coupons. The woman who drove the same old station wagon for 15 years. The woman who insisted on repairing things instead of replacing them. She owned most of the mountain? Impossible. Yet the certainty in her voice left no room for misunderstanding. Ethan rewound the tape, listened again. The same words, the same truth. Sarah had spent decades quietly purchasing land. Not openly, not directly, patiently. Parcel by parcel. Through trusts, conservation groups, anonymous transactions. Small acquisitions spread across 30 years. The realization left him stunned. The tower, the journals, the maps. Everything suddenly looked different. Sarah hadn't been chasing a lost inheritance. She had been rebuilding one piece at a time. The tape finally ended. Ethan remained motionless. Outside, rain drifted across the lake. Inside, the truth settled heavily into place. Sarah's mission had always been much bigger than he imagined. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Walter entered carrying firewood. One look at Ethan's expression told him something significant had happened. "What did she leave you?" Ethan handed him the cassette recorder. Several minutes later, Walter sat silently beside him. The old ranger appeared just as stunned. "My God." Neither man spoke for a while. Finally, Walter leaned back in his chair. "That explains everything." Ethan looked up. Walter nodded toward the mountains. Sarah wasn't investigating ownership. A pause. She was creating ownership. The distinction changed everything. The next morning brought another visitor, Rebecca Lawson. The attorney Sarah had mentioned repeatedly throughout her notes. She arrived in a dusty Jeep carrying 2 briefcases and enough paperwork to fill a small office. Rebecca appeared to be in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, direct, the kind of person who wasted neither time nor words. After brief introductions, Ethan spread Sarah's documents across the table. Rebecca spent hours reviewing them. Survey maps, trust records, property transfers, tax filings. By mid-afternoon, she finally removed her glasses and stared at Ethan. "Do you know what you're sitting on?" The question made him uneasy. "No." Rebecca nodded. "That's probably for the best." She organized several maps, then placed them side by side. The picture became clear almost immediately. Individual parcels scattered across dozens of ridges, hundreds of acres here, thousands there. Conservation easements, protected forests, remote valleys, all interconnected, all surrounding Fire Tower Ridge. Like pieces of a giant puzzle, Rebecca traced the outline with one finger. Over 30 years, Sarah acquired nearly 70% of the land surrounding this mountain. Ethan stared. The scale was staggering, Rebecca continued. Most people never noticed because the purchases were spread out. Another map appeared. Then another. The picture grew larger, more complete, more astonishing. "What about Mercer?" Rebecca's expression hardened immediately. The name clearly meant something. A problem. The answer came quickly. Too quickly, Ethan noticed. Rebecca sighed. Randall Mercer believed the ridge was the final piece. The final piece of what? The entire development corridor. Now it was beginning to make sense. Luxury resorts, private estates, commercial expansion. Without Fire Tower Ridge, Mercer couldn't connect several major properties. Sarah had unknowingly, or perhaps intentionally, positioned herself directly in his path. The realization explained the surveillance, the break-in, the fire, everything. Rebecca continued studying the documents, then suddenly stopped. Her eyes narrowed. Something had caught her attention. She pulled one deed from the stack, then another, then a third. The room grew quiet. Ethan watched carefully. "What is it?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. She continued reading, comparing, analyzing. Finally, she looked up. "What Sarah built is extraordinary." A pause. "But this is even bigger." She turned several documents toward him. Original ownership records, historical claims, boundary surveys, names, dates, signatures. The deeper she explained, the larger the truth became. Sarah's purchases weren't random. Each acquisition restored a piece of land connected to families displaced decades earlier. Entire communities, old farms, mountain homesteads, properties swallowed by fraudulent transactions generations ago. Sarah had been quietly returning ownership pathways to their original legal foundations. Not for herself, for everyone. The realization left Ethan speechless. She wasn't rebuilding a private estate. She was rebuilding a legacy. An entire mountain. A mountain that belonged to history, to families, to future generations. Rebecca finally smiled. The first genuine smile Ethan had seen from her. "Your wife was remarkable." Ethan looked toward the window. The mountains stretched beyond the lake. Silent, ancient, unchanged. Yet somehow they looked different now. Because for the first time, he understood what Sarah had actually spent 30 years doing. Not fighting the past. repairing it. The old grief returned, but alongside it came pride. Powerful, unexpected, overwhelming. Walter stepped onto the porch as evening approached. Shadow followed. The old shepherd settled beside the railing, overlooking the water. Rebecca joined them. The three humans stood quietly beneath a sky, turning gold with sunset. The mountains glowed. The lake reflected fire-colored clouds. For a few minutes, nobody spoke. Then Rebecca finally broke the silence. "Mercer thinks he's fighting for land." Ethan looked at her. She shook her head. "No." Her gaze drifted toward the mountains. "He's fighting against 30 years of planning." The words lingered. Powerful, true. And somewhere far away, Ethan suspected Randall Mercer was beginning to realize the same thing. Because Sarah's secret was finally out. She hadn't spent 30 years documenting a stolen legacy. She had spent 30 years rebuilding it. And now the mountain belonged to something far bigger than any one person. The question was how far Mercer would go once he realized just how much he stood to lose. As the last sunlight disappeared beyond the ridges, Shadow lifted his head toward the darkening horizons. Alert, watching, the old shepherd had led Ethan this far. But deep inside, Ethan felt certain the hardest battle was still ahead. Because men like Mercer rarely surrendered. And Sarah somehow seemed to have anticipated that too. The legal challenge arrived 3 days later. Not by mail, not through a phone call, but in person. A black SUV rolled slowly up Walter Briggs's gravel driveway just after sunrise. The vehicle stopped beside the cabin. A woman in a dark business suit stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. She looked professional, polite, precise. The kind of person trained to deliver unpleasant news with a pleasant expression. Shadow noticed her before anyone else. The German shepherd lifted his head from the porch. His ears rose immediately, not aggressive, alert, watching. Ethan stepped outside. Walter joined him. The woman approached calmly. "Mr. Ethan Cole? That's me." She offered a folder. "My name is Diane Keller. I'm representing Mercer Development Holdings." The name alone told Ethan everything he needed to know. "Mercer." Again, the woman continued. "My client is formally contesting the validity of multiple ownership claims associated with the Ridge Conservation Trust." Walter's expression darkened. Rebecca Lawson, who had arrived earlier that morning to review additional records, stepped onto the porch behind them. The attorney accepted the folder, quickly scanned its contents, then sighed. "They moved faster than I expected." The woman offered a polite smile. "My client believes several land transfers may contain irregularities." Rebecca looked up. "Your client knows that's nonsense." The smile never changed. "My client disagrees." The woman returned to her vehicle. The conversation was over. The challenge had officially begun. The SUV disappeared down the mountain road, leaving silence behind. Rebecca spent the next 2 hours reviewing the legal documents. By noon, the situation was clear. Mercer wasn't attacking Sarah's evidence. He was attacking the ownership structure itself. Dozens of acquisitions. Multiple trusts, various conservation organizations, 30 years of transactions. Mercer hoped to create enough confusion to delay everything. Maybe long enough to gain leverage. Maybe long enough to force a settlement. Maybe long enough to win. Rebecca closed the folder. "He doesn't need to prove he's right." Ethan frowned. "He just needs to make everything expensive and complicated." Walter shook his head. "Classic." Rebecca nodded. "Exactly." The cabin fell quiet. Outside, autumn wind moved through the pines. The lake reflected a sky filled with drifting clouds. Everything looked peaceful. Yet tension hung heavily in the room. Mercer had made his move. The final battle was beginning. That evening, Ethan sat alone on the porch. Shadow rested beside him. The old shepherd seemed calmer now. His shoulder had nearly healed. Only a faint stiffness remained. The mountains stretched endlessly beyond the lake, dark ridges fading into deeper shadows. For a long time, Ethan simply watched the sunset. The same mountains Sarah had spent decades protecting. The same mountains Mercer wanted to control. The same mountains now sitting at the center of a legal war. His hand drifted absent-mindedly toward Shadow's neck. The familiar military collar rested beneath the dog's fur, a weathered piece of equipment, years old, worn smooth through service. Sarah had always refused to replace it. The memory surfaced suddenly. One afternoon years ago, Ethan holding a brand new collar, Sarah smiling. No, she had laughed. That one stays. At the time, the comment seemed insignificant. Now it returned with strange clarity. Ethan frowned. His fingers moved across the collar, studying it, feeling its edges. Something caught his attention. A slight bump. Tiny, almost impossible to notice. He examined it more closely. The leather had been modified carefully, professionally. A section near the buckle felt thicker than the rest. Shadow watched patiently. The old shepherd trusted him completely. Ethan carried the collar inside. Rebecca was still reviewing documents. Walter sat reading beside the fireplace. Neither paid much attention at first. Then Ethan produced a small utility knife. Carefully, he examined the stitching. Something wasn't right. The stitching near the buckle differed from the original pattern. Newer thread, hidden skillfully, deliberately. Rebecca immediately noticed. "What are you doing?" "I don't know yet." The answer was honest. He carefully loosened several stitches. The leather separated. A tiny waterproof tube slid onto the table. Silence filled the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For several seconds, they simply stared. Rebecca leaned forward slowly. Walter lowered his book. Even Shadow seemed interested. The capsule looked old, very old. Ethan carefully unscrewed the seal. Inside rested 2 folded documents. Nothing more, nothing less. His heartbeat accelerated. Sarah. Again, always Sarah. The first document contained a notarized statement, signed years earlier, witnessed, official, legal. The second contained access information, coordinates, passwords, archive references. Rebecca's eyes widened immediately. "This is unbelievable." Ethan looked up. "What?" She pointed toward the page. Sarah created a secure historical archive, a pause, and apparently nobody knew it existed. The room suddenly felt charged with energy. The coordinates pointed toward a private records facility in Knoxville. A preservation archive, one specializing in historical land documentation. Rebecca read further, then sat back slowly. "Oh my God." Walter frowned. "What is it?" Rebecca looked directly at Ethan. She anticipated Mercer. The words landed heavily. Nobody spoke. Rebecca continued. "This archive contains copies. Copies of what?" "Everything." The answer stunned them. Land records, witness statements, historical surveys, property transfers, audio recordings, photographs, decades of evidence. Stored securely, protected, waiting. Sarah hadn't trusted only one location. She built backups, redundancies, safeguards. Exactly the way a military planner would. Exactly the way someone preparing for opposition would. Ethan sat quietly. A strange mix of emotions moved through him. Admiration, disbelief, love, frustration. Sarah had thought of everything, every possibility, every threat, every weakness, even Mercer, especially Mercer. The realization became impossible to ignore. This wasn't luck. This wasn't improvisation. This was strategy. 30 years of strategy. The same woman who quietly made coffee every morning. The same woman who reminded him to take medication. The same woman who sat beside him during sleepless nights. She had been preparing for this moment for decades, and somehow she had hidden it all. Rebecca carefully unfolded the notarized statement. The final paragraph caught everyone's attention. "If ownership is challenged, direct all inquiries to Archive Box 77A. The supporting evidence has been preserved specifically for future legal defense." Signed, Sarah Cole, dated 12 years earlier. 12 years. She had predicted a legal challenge 12 years before it happened. Walter let out a low whistle. Rebecca simply shook her head. "I've practiced law for 25 years. She looked at Ethan. "I've never seen anything like this." The evening deepened outside. Stars appeared over the mountains. The lake reflected moonlight. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had changed completely. For the first time since Mercer launched his challenge, hope outweighed concern. Because Sarah had already prepared an answer. Years ago, long before anyone realized they would need it, Ethan carried the capsule outside. The cool night air felt different somehow. Lighter. Shadow followed. The old shepherd settled beside him on the porch. The mountains stretched beneath the stars, silent, patient, watching. Ethan looked down at the weathered collar, resting in his hands. For years he believed it was simply an old piece of equipment, a memory from another life. Now he understood. Sarah had hidden one final safeguard inside the thing Ethan trusted most. Inside the collar worn by the dog she trusted most. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. She had known. Known that one day Shadow would lead him forward. Known that one day Mercer would strike. Known that one day Ethan would need one final clue. And she had hidden it where nobody would ever think to look. Except perhaps the man who loved both her and the dog enough to notice. The mountains remained quiet, but Ethan felt the battle shifting. Mercer thought he was challenging land ownership. What he didn't realize was that Sarah had spent decades building a defense waiting specifically for him. And somewhere inside that hidden archive lay evidence powerful enough to destroy everything Mercer was trying to protect. The only question now was what exactly Sarah had discovered, and why she had been so certain Mercer would eventually come after the mountain. The answer waited inside Archive Box 77A, and for the first time Ethan had the feeling that Sarah's greatest secret still hadn't been revealed. The archive sat inside a limestone building on the edge of Knoxville. From the outside, it looked unremarkable. A former courthouse converted into a preservation records center. Tall windows, white columns, weathered stone walls. Nothing about it suggested that decades of secrets waited inside. Yet Sarah had trusted this place enough to build her final safeguard around it. That alone made Ethan pay attention. The morning sky hung low and gray as he, Rebecca Lawson, Walter Briggs, and Shadow pulled into the parking lot. The old German shepherd sat upright in the truck, watching. Always watching. The building reflected in his dark eyes. The closer they came to the truth, the more alert he seemed. Rebecca carried the authorization papers Sarah had hidden inside Shadow's collar. The archive director reviewed them carefully, then disappeared into the back of the facility. Several minutes passed. Nobody spoke. The silence felt heavy, important. Finally, the director returned. In his hands rested a gray metal records box, Archive Box 77. The object seemed ordinary, small, plain. Yet everyone in the room stared at it. Because Sarah had spent 12 years protecting whatever waited inside. The director placed the box on a table. Rebecca unlocked it. The lid opened. Silence filled the room. Inside rested dozens of folders, photographs, land surveys, witness affidavits, recorded interviews, legal correspondence, and one thick binder labeled Mercer Family Historical Records. Rebecca slowly opened it. The deeper she read, the more serious her expression became. 20 minutes later she stopped, looked at Ethan, then looked at Walter. Neither man liked what they saw. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Rebecca exhaled slowly. The entire thing, a pause. The entire original land transfer. She turned several pages toward them. Old records, over 70 years old. Official documents, property transfers, signatures, court filings. At first, everything appeared normal. Then Rebecca pointed toward several sections. Missing witnesses, altered boundaries, questionable authorizations, transactions approved by officials, later investigated for corruption. A pattern emerged, piece by piece, year by year. The Mercer family hadn't simply benefited from questionable land transfers. They had built their empire on them. The realization settled heavily over the room. Walter lowered himself into a chair. "My God," Rebecca continued reading. The evidence became overwhelming. families pressured into selling, records mysteriously disappearing, property lines changing without explanation, entire communities displaced. Everything Sarah suspected, everything she spent 30 years documenting, now supported by original records, original proof, original truth. Then Rebecca found something even more devastating. A recorded interview, nearly 40 years old, an elderly surveyor, one of the last surviving witnesses connected to the original transfers. Sarah had preserved his testimony. His voice filled the room through a small recorder, calm, steady, clear. The man described meetings, deals, pressure, threats, and one name repeated throughout the recording. Mercer, the grandfather, the founder, the beginning. When the interview ended, nobody spoke for several seconds. The room felt smaller, heavier. The evidence wasn't circumstantial anymore. It wasn't theory. It wasn't suspicion. It was history, documented, verified, preserved. Sarah had done exactly what she promised. She rebuilt the truth. The legal hearing began 2 weeks later. The courthouse in Sevier County overflowed with people. Local reporters, historians, residents, conservation groups, families whose names appeared throughout Sarah's records. Word had spread quickly. The mountain wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It had become something larger, a reckoning. Ethan sat beside Rebecca. Shadow rested at his feet beneath the council table. The old shepherd had become something of a local symbol by now. People recognized him. Stories about the fire on the ridge had spread across the county. Many knew the dog had helped uncover Sarah's evidence. Few understood just how much. Across the courtroom sat Randall Mercer. For the first time, Ethan saw him clearly. Tall, confident, expensive suit, perfect posture. A man accustomed to winning. A man who spent his life believing power solved every problem. Their eyes met briefly. Mercer looked away first. The hearing lasted hours. Rebecca methodically presented the evidence, one document at a time, one witness at a time, one truth at a time. The archive records, the survey maps, the historical testimony, Sarah's preservation files. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Mercer's attorneys fought back, objected, challenged, argued, but every argument encountered another document, another witness, another piece of proof. Then something unexpected happened. The courtroom doors opened. An elderly woman entered. Then another. Then a man carrying old photographs. Then several more families. People whose names appeared in Sarah's journals. People connected to the original land. People who thought their stories had been forgotten. One by one they spoke. Not dramatically, not emotionally, simply truthfully. Family histories, lost farms, displaced communities, memories passed down through generations. Sarah had spent decades finding them, listening to them, preserving them, and now they stood together. Not because she asked, because she mattered. Mercer's confidence began to crack. For the first time all day, Ethan noticed uncertainty. The developer's posture changed, his expression tightened. The courtroom felt it too. Because everyone understood the same thing. The evidence wasn't collapsing. It was growing stronger. Hours later, the judge recessed briefly. The courtroom emptied into hallways and waiting rooms. Ethan stepped outside. The autumn air felt cool against his face. Shadow followed. The old shepherd sat beside him on a courthouse bench. For several minutes, they simply watched leaves drift across the lawn. Then Rebecca appeared, carrying several folders. For the first time since this began, she smiled. "We have him." The words felt almost unreal. Ethan looked toward the courthouse windows, toward the battle Sarah started decades earlier. A battle he never knew existed. A battle she had already won. The realization struck him suddenly. All this time he thought he was fighting for Sarah, protecting her legacy, defending her work. But Sarah never needed saving. Not really. She already built the defense, already gathered the proof, already anticipated the attack, already prepared the answer. The war he believed he was fighting had been won years ago. He was simply carrying it across the finish line. The hearing resumed. Near sunset, the judge delivered the decision. Mercer's challenge failed completely. The ownership claims stood. The conservation protections remained intact. The evidence entered permanent record. Every major argument collapsed. Years of leverage disappeared. The courtroom erupted into relieved applause before the judge restored order. Mercer sat motionless, staring ahead. His attorneys whispered urgently. It didn't matter. The outcome was final. The mountain was protected. The truth survived, and Sarah's mission endured. As people slowly left the courthouse, many stopped to thank Ethan. Others thanked Rebecca. Several knelt beside Shadow. The old shepherd accepted the attention with quiet dignity. He never seemed interested in praise, only purpose. Later that evening, after the crowds disappeared, Ethan stood alone outside the courthouse. The sky burned orange above the Smoky Mountains. The same mountains Sarah spent 30 years protecting. The same mountains now safe. Shadow sat beside him. Walter stood nearby. Rebecca joined them. Nobody spoke for a while. The moment deserved silence. Eventually, Walter broke it. She'd be proud. Ethan looked toward the distant ridges. The grief remained. It always would. But something had changed. Something fundamental. Sarah hadn't left him empty-handed. She hadn't left him broken. She hadn't left him alone. She left him a future. The realization settled into place quietly, like a puzzle piece finally finding where it belonged. The mountain was protected. Mercer had lost. The truth had survived. But the greatest victory wasn't legal. It wasn't financial. It wasn't historical. The greatest victory was personal. Because for the first time since Sarah died, Ethan no longer saw only what he had lost. He could finally see what she had left behind. And somehow, across 30 years of planning and preparation, Sarah had managed to give him exactly what he needed most. A reason to keep moving forward. A reason to keep living. A reason to believe tomorrow still mattered. The war was over, but the future was just beginning. 1 year later, spring returned to the Smoky Mountains. The forests that had stood silent beneath winter snow now glowed with new life. Dogwoods bloomed along the ridges. Wildflowers painted the valleys. Morning fog drifted through the mountains like slow-moving rivers of silver. And high above them all, on the land Sarah had spent 30 years protecting, something remarkable had taken root. A wooden sign stood beside a winding gravel road, simple, handcrafted, weather-resistant. 3 words had been carved into the cedar surface. Sarah's Ridge Retreat. The name caught the morning sunlight. Beyond it stretched hundreds of protected acres, trails, forests, cabins, open meadows. And at the highest point on the property, overlooking endless layers of blue mountains, stood a newly constructed observation lodge, built near the site where the old fire tower once stood. Not a luxury resort, not a private estate, something better, something Sarah would have loved. The retreat welcomed veterans struggling with PTSD, military families rebuilding their lives, rescue dogs waiting for second chances, people carrying burdens too heavy to carry alone. The mountain had become exactly what Sarah intended, a place of healing, a place of purpose, a place to begin again. Ethan stood on the observation deck shortly after sunrise. A mug of coffee warmed his hands. The mountain air felt cool and clean. The smell of pine drifted through the breeze. Far below, several veterans walked the Eastern Trail system with volunteer guides. Near the main lodge, a group of rescue dogs played inside a fenced training area. Laughter echoed faintly across the hillside. The sound still surprised him sometimes. Not because it was rare, because it existed here at all. A year earlier, this mountain had been at the center of conflict. Now it had become a sanctuary. The transformation felt almost impossible. Yet every board, every trail, every cabin, every program, all of it traced back to Sarah and one very determined German shepherd. A familiar weight settled against Ethan's leg. He looked down. Shadow, older now, slower, his muzzle nearly white. The scars from the fire remained visible beneath his fur. So did the scar from the knife wound months earlier. The old dog carried every mark with quiet dignity. Visitors knew his story. Children asked to meet him. Veterans often sat beside him for hours. Somehow Shadow seemed to understand exactly who needed comfort, exactly who needed company, exactly who needed a reason to smile. People called him the Guardian of the Ridge. The title suited him. Ethan scratched behind the dog's ears. Shadow leaned gently into his hand, still loyal, still watching, still finding his way home. A truck appeared on the road below, then another, then several more. The retreat's newest guests had arrived. Some carried military backpacks. Some carried emotional wounds invisible to everyone else. Ethan recognized the look immediately. He had worn it himself. The hollow stare, the uncertainty, the exhaustion. The feeling that life had ended somewhere behind you. He understood, because once upon a time, he stood exactly where they stood now. One visitor caught his attention, a younger veteran in his 30s, quiet, withdrawn, keeping distance from everyone. Ethan watched as Shadow slowly approached him. The man knelt cautiously. The German shepherd sat beside him. Nothing dramatic happened, no grand moment, no speech. The man simply rested one hand on Shadow's neck, and for the first time since arriving he smiled. A small smile, but real. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Not grief, not pain, something warmer, purpose. Sarah was right. There were people he hadn't met yet. People who needed this place. People who needed tomorrow. The morning passed peacefully. Guests explored trails. Volunteers prepared meals. Families gathered near the lake. Life continued. The mountain breathed. And everywhere Ethan looked, he saw evidence of Sarah's vision becoming reality. By afternoon, the sky had turned brilliantly blue. Clouds drifted lazily above distant peaks. Walter Briggs arrived carrying fishing gear. Rebecca Lawson followed shortly after, with a stack of paperwork she claimed she wasn't bringing. Neither fooled anyone. The three friends shared lunch on the observation deck. Shadow slept nearby. Content, safe, home. Conversation drifted naturally between memories and plans. Projects for next season, trail expansions, conservation partnerships, new veteran programs, the future, always the future. And that realization made Ethan smile, because there had been a time when he couldn't imagine having one. Late that afternoon, after most guests had settled in, Ethan decided to walk alone. He followed a narrow trail leading toward the original fire tower site. The structure itself was gone. Only a stone foundation remained. A memorial plaque now stood there. Simple, respectful, it honored Sarah's work, the local families she helped, and the volunteers who preserved the mountain. As Ethan approached the clearing, something caught his attention. A section of weathered wood near the foundation appeared slightly raised. The sight immediately reminded him of the hidden compartment beneath the old tower floor. His pulse quickened, not from fear, from familiarity. He knelt carefully, examined the board, then smiled. Sarah, even now, even after everything. Using a pocket tool, he lifted the loose section. Beneath it rested a small metal box, no larger than a paperback book. His throat tightened. For several moments he simply stared, then carefully opened it. Inside rested a single envelope. His name appeared on the front. Ethan. Nothing else, no explanation, no instructions. Only his name. The handwriting was unmistakable. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The paper inside had yellowed with age. The letter was short, very short, but every word mattered. If you're reading this, then Shadow succeeded. Ethan laughed softly through sudden tears. Only Sarah would begin that way. The letter continued. He always knew how to find his way home, and he was always going to bring you with him. The mountains blurred for a moment. Ethan blinked. Read on. You spent most of your life protecting other people. It's time to let people protect you too. Don't waste what comes next. Live it, love it, share it. That's what this mountain was always for. Not land, not ownership, not legacy, hope. The letter ended there, no farewell, no dramatic final words, just Sarah, simple, honest, certain. Ethan sat quietly beside the foundation. The afternoon sunlight warmed the clearing. Birds sang in nearby trees. The wind moved gently through the grass. Everything felt still, complete. For a long time he remained there, holding the letter, thinking about the journey, the truck outside the bus station, the cedar box, the maps, the tower, the fire, the court battle, the mountain, the grief, the purpose, the healing. Every step traced back to one woman who loved him enough to think 30 years ahead. Eventually he heard familiar footsteps approaching. Shadow emerged from the trail. Moving slowly now, age showed more clearly each season, yet his eyes remained bright. The old shepherd crossed the clearing and settled beside him, exactly where he belonged. Ethan wrapped one arm around the dog's shoulders. Together they looked across the mountains, layer after layer stretching toward the horizon, golden beneath the setting sun, the same mountains Sarah saw, the same mountains she protected, the same mountains now helping others find their way forward. The grief never disappeared completely. It probably never would. The anger had faded long ago. In its place remained understanding and gratitude. Sarah had hidden many secrets. But in the end, the greatest secret was never the land, never the deeds, never the evidence. It was hope. Hope carefully planted decades earlier. Hope hidden inside maps and journals and collars and mountains. Hope left behind for a man who would someday need it. The sun slipped lower. The sky turned gold, then orange, then crimson. Shadow rested his head against Ethan's knee. The old dog sighed contentedly. And as evening settled across Sarah's ridge, Ethan finally understood the truth. He had lost his wife. He had lost his home. He had lost the life he thought would last forever. But because of Sarah, because of Shadow, because of a secret hidden for decades, he found something else. A future. The mountains stood silent around them. The season would change again. New guests would arrive. New stories would begin. And Ethan would be here when they did. Because someday had finally arrived, and it was his. If this story touched your heart, comment 1. If you believe loyalty can change a life. Or 0. If you think some secrets are better left buried. Sometimes the greatest legacy we leave behind isn't land or money. It's hope, purpose, and the people we help along the way. And if you enjoy stories about courage, justice, and second chances, subscribe and join us for the next journey.